Sarah, heartbroken and lost, sought solace in the woods. Aching for peace, she yearned for the embrace of nature. Every crunching leaf, every snapping twig echoed her pain. The forest, vast and unforgiving, welcomed her with open arms. Sunlight, dappled and weak, struggled to pierce the dense canopy. Shadows danced and shifted, mimicking her unsteady gait. With each step, the world outside faded, replaced by an unsettling quiet. The forest held its breath, waiting. The path, barely visible, wound its way through towering trees. Twisted branches, like skeletal fingers, reached out, eager to ensnare her. Thorns tore at her clothes, a physical manifestation of her inner turmoil. The deeper she ventured, the more oppressive the forest became. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, filled her lungs. A strange mist clung to the ground, swirling around her ankles like phantom limbs. An owl hooted in the distance, its mournful cry sending shivers down her spine. She was not alone. A shadowy figure loomed in the distance, barely visible through the mist. Her eyes widened in fear, her breath quickening as the figure drew closer. She stumbled upon an ancient stone, weathered and etched with cryptic symbols, half buried in the forest floor. Flickering lights danced in the distance like will-o'-the-wisps, leading her deeper into the unknown. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch the stone, a sense of foreboding washing over her. Eerie, glowing eyes watched from the darkness, their presence sending chills down her spine. Silence pressed in on her, suffocating, absolute. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch sounded unnaturally loud. Her heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum against the silence of the woods. Was she imagining it, or were there whispers carried on the wind? They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, faint murmurs just beyond the realm of comprehension. They spoke of secrets, of shadows, of things best left undisturbed. Panic welled up inside her, a primal fear she couldn't ignore. She had to escape. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each step a struggle against the unseen forces that seemed to pull her back. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to tell her something vital, something she needed to know. She stumbled, falling to the ground, her hands grasping at the cold, damp earth. The whispers were all around her now, a cacophony of voices that made her head spin. With a surge of determination, she pushed herself up, her mind set on one thing: survival. She had to find a way out of this nightmare. In the distance, she saw a faint light, a beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. She ran towards it, her heart pounding, the whispers fading behind her. As she broke through the trees and into the light, the whispers ceased, leaving her in blessed silence. She was free, but the memory of the whispers would haunt her forever. Section 4. The Abandoned Cabin. The forest was dense, the trees towering high above, their branches intertwining to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The path was narrow and winding, barely visible under the thick layer of fallen leaves and twigs. The air was cool and damp, filled with the earthy scent of moss and decaying wood. Every step she took seemed to echo in the silence, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound in the otherwise still forest. Through the trees, a silhouette emerged, dark and foreboding. It was difficult to make out any details, but the figure seemed to be watching her, its presence sending a chill down her spine. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees pressing closer together, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. She could feel the weight of the figure's gaze on her, a constant reminder that she was not alone. An old cabin, half hidden by overgrown vines, stood like a spectre in the fading light. The structure was barely visible through the thick foliage, its wooden walls weathered and worn by years of neglect. The roof sagged under the weight of the vines, and the windows were dark and empty, like the eyes of a long-forgotten ghost. The sight of the cabin filled her with a strange mix of hope and dread. It was a place of refuge, but also a place of danger. a place where anything could happen. Its windows, like vacant eyes, stared back at her, promising shelter, or perhaps something more sinister. The glass was cracked and dirty, the frames warped and splintered. She could see the faint outline of the interior through the grime, but it was impossible to make out any details. The cabin seemed to be watching her, waiting for her to make a move. She hesitated, unsure whether to approach or turn back. But the forest offered no other options, and she knew she had to take the chance. Driven by a desperate hope for refuge, she stumbled towards it. Her legs were heavy with exhaustion, her body aching from the long journey through the forest. She could feel the rough bark of the trees scraping against her skin, the sharp thorns of the underbrush tearing at her clothes. But she pushed on, driven by the need to find shelter, to escape the figure that still watched her from the shadows. The cabin was her only hope, and she clung to it like a lifeline. The door, rotten and hanging by a single hinge, creaked open with her touch. The sound was loud in the silence, a harsh reminder of how fragile the structure was. She pushed the door open further, the wood groaning in protest. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of mould and decay. She stepped inside, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. The floorboards creaked under her weight, and she could feel the dust settling on her skin. Inside, dust motes danced in the faint rays of sunlight that pierced through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The light was weak and flickering, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift with every breath. The room was filled with old furniture, covered in a thick layer of dust. A broken chair lay on its side in the corner, and a table stood in the centre of the room, its surface marred by deep scratches and stains. The air was heavy with the weight of the past, the memories of those who had once called this place home. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else, something ancient and unsettling. It was a smell that seemed to seep into her very bones, a reminder of the passage of time and the inevitability of decay. She could feel the presence of the past all around her, the ghosts of those who had lived and died in this place. The cabin was a relic of a bygone era, a testament to the passage of time and the power of nature to reclaim what was once lost. She knew she had to be careful, to tread lightly in this place of shadows and memories. Section 5. Trapped. The whispers intensified within the confines of the cabin, swirling around her like a malevolent vortex. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, making it hard to breathe. Every corner of the room seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if the cabin itself was a living, breathing entity. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the very fabric of the building. The timber, aged and worn, creaked and groaned, as if whispering secrets of its own. The shadows danced on the walls, creating eerie shapes that seemed to move with a purpose. Terror, cold and paralyzing, gripped her heart. Her pulse quickened, and her breath came in shallow gasps. She could feel the icy tendrils of fear wrapping around her, squeezing tighter with each passing second. Frantically she searched for an escape, but the windows were nailed shut, the boards old but sturdy, mocking her feeble attempts to pry them open. Her fingers bled from the effort, but she couldn't stop. She had to find a way out. The door was barricaded from the outside, a heavy wooden beam across it, sealing her fate. She pounded on it, screaming for help, but her cries were swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest outside. She was trapped, imprisoned with the whispers that grew louder, more insistent, their voices a cacophony of torment. They seemed to be inside her head, echoing her own thoughts and fears. Their words began to form discernible sentences, each one more terrifying than the last. They spoke of her deepest fears, her darkest secrets, things she had never told anyone. It was as if the cabin knew her, knew everything about her. They spoke of her deepest fears, her darkest secrets, things known only to her. The whispers taunted her, reminding her of every mistake, every regret. They knew her weaknesses, her vulnerabilities, and they exploited them mercilessly. She felt her sanity slipping away, the relentless whispers eroding her sense of self. She was losing herself to the darkness, to the malevolent force that held her captive. The cabin was not just a physical prison, but a mental one as well, trapping her in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Section 6. The Secrets of the Forest. Deep within the heart of the forest, where the light barely penetrates and shadows dance with an eerie grace, lies a world shrouded in mystery and ancient lore. The trees, towering and ancient, seem to whisper secrets to those who dare to venture into their domain. The whispers surrounded her, suffocating her, driving her to the brink of madness. Each rustle of leaves, each creak of the branches seemed to carry a message, a warning from the past. She felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, unseen but ever present, watching her every move. As darkness enveloped the cabin, the whispers reached a fever pitch, their chilling message echoing in her mind. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with an oppressive presence. She could almost make out words, fragments of sentences that hinted at a terrible truth, a secret that the forest had guarded for centuries. Some secrets, they hissed, are best left buried, hidden beneath the layers of time and memory. The forest had seen countless souls come and go, each leaving behind a piece of their story, a fragment of their essence. It was a living, breathing entity, ancient and wise, and it knew the cost of uncovering its deepest secrets. Some truths too terrible to uncover, truths that could shatter the very fabric of reality. She felt a chill run down her spine, a coldness that seemed to seep into her very bones. The forest was not just a place, it was a guardian, a keeper of the balance between light and dark, life and death. The forest, she realized, held ancient and powerful forces, forces that had been there long before humans walked the earth. These forces were neither good nor evil, they simply were, existing in a state of perpetual balance. She had unwittingly awakened something that had been dormant for eons, waiting for the right moment to stir. Forces that she had unwittingly awakened, forces that now seemed to be aware of her presence. She felt a connection, a bond that tied her to the forest in ways she could not fully understand. It was as if the forest had chosen her, marked her as its own, and there was no turning back. As the whispers finally faded into an eerie silence, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. She knew that she had crossed a threshold, entered a realm where few dared to tread. The silence was not just an absence of sound, it was a presence, a living, breathing entity that enveloped her. She knew that she would never be the same. The forest had changed her, marked her in ways that were both visible and invisible. She could feel its presence within her, a constant reminder of the secrets she had uncovered. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now held a depth, a knowledge that only those who had faced the forest's truths could understand. The forest kept its secrets, guarding them jealously, revealing them only to those deemed worthy. It was a place of mystery, of wonder and of terror. Each tree, each shadow, held a story, a fragment of the past waiting to be discovered. But the forest chose who could uncover its secrets, and it demanded a price, and she would forever bear the mark of their chilling revelation. The forest had left its imprint on her soul, a scar that would never fade. She was now a part of its story, a guardian of its secrets, bound to it for eternity. The whispers, the shadows, the ancient forces, they were all a part of her now, and she a part of them. Pause 3. As the scream in the night, echoes of terror. You need to hear this if you're a fan of chilling tales. The forest grew darker as the night progressed, shadows dancing with the wind. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Each sound seemed amplified, carrying a weight that pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The whispers had faded, leaving behind a silence that was almost deafening in its intensity. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night, sending shivers down the spine of anyone who heard it. It was a scream of pure terror, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of despair. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest, the scream echoing in her mind. The source of the scream remained a mystery, hidden deep within the forest shadows. As she stood there, paralyzed by fear, she could feel the forest around her come alive. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, a chill that seemed to seep into her very bones. She knew she had to move to find the source of the scream, but her legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot. With a deep breath, she forced herself to take a step forward, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. Each step felt like an eternity. The silence around her growing more oppressive with every passing moment. The scream had come from somewhere close, she was sure of it, but the shadows seemed to shift and change, making it impossible to find a clear path. She called out, her voice trembling, but there was no response. The forest swallowed her words, the silence returning with an almost palpable force. She felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, unseen but ever present, watching her every move. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. What could have caused such a scream? Was it a warning, a cry for help, or something far more sinister? The questions swirled in her mind, but there were no answers, only the oppressive silence and the ever-present shadows. She knew she was not alone, that something was out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. As she ventured deeper into the forest, the sense of dread grew stronger. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches forming a twisted maze that threatened to trap her forever. The air grew colder, the chill biting into her skin, and she could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful watching her every move. Suddenly she stumbled upon a clearing, the moonlight casting an eerie glow on the scene before her. There, in the centre of the clearing, lay the source of the scream. It was a sight that would haunt her for the rest of her days, a vision of horror that seemed to defy explanation. The forest had revealed another of its dark secrets, and she knew that she would never be the same. The scream in the night had marked her, a chilling reminder of the forces that lurked within the forest's shadows. She had uncovered another layer of the forest's mysteries, but at what cost? The silence that followed was not just an absence of sound, it was a presence, a living, breathing entity that enveloped her. The forest had claimed another piece of her soul, and she knew that she would forever be bound to its dark and twisted secrets. As the scream faded, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a woman, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She stumbled through the forest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the shadows seemed to move, following her every step. She knew she had to keep moving, but her legs felt like lead, and her heart pounded in her chest. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes darting through the trees, searching for any sign of her pursuer. The forest, once a place of mystery, had now become a labyrinth of fear. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of panic through her. She could feel the presence of something sinister, always just out of sight, always just a step behind. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy above, casting an eerie glow on the path ahead. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root, and fell to the ground. The cold, damp earth clung to her as she struggled to get back up. Her hands trembled, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She knew she couldn't stop, couldn't afford to rest. The scream had drawn her here, but now she was the hunted. She pushed herself up, her legs shaking with the effort, and continued to move forward. The shadows seemed to close in around her, the darkness growing thicker with every step. Suddenly, she heard a sound behind her, a low growl that sent a shiver down her spine. She turned, her eyes wide with fear, but saw nothing. The forest was alive with whispers, the trees seeming to lean in, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. She could feel the weight of countless eyes upon her, unseen but ever present, watching her every move. She broke into a run, her feet pounding the forest floor, but the shadows followed, relentless in their pursuit. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the presence drawing closer, the air growing colder with every passing moment. As she ran, she saw a faint light in the distance, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. She pushed herself harder, her legs burning with the effort, her lungs screaming for air. The light grew brighter, a beacon in the night, guiding her towards safety. But as she neared the light, she felt a cold hand grip her shoulder, pulling her back into the shadows. She screamed, a sound of pure terror that echoed through the forest. The light flickered and faded, leaving her alone in the darkness, the shadows closing in around her. The forest had claimed another victim, its secrets buried deep within the shadows. The woman's scream echoed through the night, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked within the forest's depths. And as the darkness swallowed her whole, the forest fell silent once more, waiting for its next prey. The woman reached an old abandoned cabin. She pushed open the door and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her. The cabin was dark and musty, filled with the scent of decay. She could hear the shadows outside, whispering her name. She knew she wasn't safe, but she had nowhere else to go. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and cobwebs hung from the corners like forgotten memories. She leaned against the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls seemed to close in around her, the darkness pressing in from all sides. She moved deeper into the cabin, her hands trembling as she fumbled for a light. A small flickering candle sat on a rickety table in the centre of the room. She lit it with shaking hands, the tiny flame casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The light revealed old, decaying furniture and the remnants of a life long forgotten. The woman felt a chill run down her spine as she realized she was not alone. In the corner of the room, an old rocking chair began to move, creaking slowly back and forth. The woman froze, her eyes wide with terror. She could feel the presence of something malevolent, something ancient and angry. The whispers outside grew louder, more insistent, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the chair. Suddenly the cabin's door rattled violently, as if something was trying to force its way in. The woman backed away, her heart racing, her mind screaming for her to run. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. She was trapped. The candle flickered and went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. The whispers outside turned into a cacophony of voices, each one more desperate and sinister than the last. The woman felt a cold hand brush against her cheek, and she screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. The cabin seemed to come alive, the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. She could feel the presence of countless souls trapped within the cabin's walls, their pain and suffering echoing through the darkness. The woman fell to her knees, her body trembling, her mind on the brink of collapse, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the noise stopped. The cabin fell silent, the darkness receding, leaving the woman alone and broken. She knew she had to escape, had to find a way out before the shadows claimed her too. But as she stood, a cold, lifeless voice whispered in her ear, "You can never leave." The woman's scream echoed through the night, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within the forest and the cabin's cursed walls. The forest had claimed another victim, its secrets buried deep within the shadows, and as the darkness swallowed her whole, the cabin fell silent once more, waiting for its next prey. Inside the cabin, the woman found a dusty old journal. She opened it and began to read, her hands trembling. The journal told the story of a family who had lived in the cabin many years ago. They had been haunted by a malevolent spirit, driven to madness and despair. The woman realized with horror that the spirit was still here, and it was coming for her. As she read, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to dance in the flickering candlelight. The journal's pages were filled with desperate scrawled entries, detailing the family's descent into madness. They spoke of strange noises in the night, of whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. They wrote of the children's nightmares, of their screams echoing through the cabin. The woman could feel the weight of their suffering, their fear seeping into her bones. She turned the pages frantically, her eyes wide with terror. The final entry was written in a shaky hand, the ink smudged and faded. It spoke of the family's last night in the cabin, of the spirit's final horrific attack. The father had tried to protect his family, but he had failed. The last words were a plea for mercy, a desperate cry for help that had never come. The woman dropped the journal, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She could feel the spirit's presence growing stronger, its malevolence wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. The whispers outside the cabin grew louder, more insistent, and she knew she had to escape before it was too late. But as she turned to flee, the cabin's door burst open, and a dark, malevolent figure stood in the doorway. The woman's heart raced, her mind screaming in terror. She was trapped, with no way out. The spirit moved closer, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. The woman backed away, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her mind filled with the family's final desperate pleas. And then, with a sudden bone-chilling scream, the spirit lunged at her. The woman's scream echoed through the night, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within the forest and the cabin's cursed walls. The forest had claimed another victim, its secrets buried deep within the shadows. And as the darkness swallowed her whole, the cabin fell silent once more, waiting for its next prey. The shadows outside grew louder, their whispers turning into screams. The woman knew she had to leave the cabin, but fear paralyzed her. She could feel the spirit's presence, cold and malevolent, closing in on her. She took a deep breath and forced herself to move, her heart pounding in her chest. She stumbled towards the door, her steps faltering as the whispers turned into a deafening roar. The spirit's malevolent energy wrapped around her, pulling her back into the darkness. She fought against it, her mind racing with the family's final, desperate pleas for mercy. As she reached the door, it slammed shut with a force that echoed through the cabin. The woman screamed, her voice raw with terror. She turned and saw the dark figure looming closer, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. The air grew colder, and she could see her breath misting in front of her. Desperation fueled her movements as she searched for another way out. She spotted a small window near the back of the cabin and ran towards it, her hands shaking as she tried to unlatch it. The spirit's presence grew stronger, its whispers now a cacophony of voices urging her to give up. With a final frantic effort, she managed to open the window and squeezed through, her body scraping against the rough wooden frame. She fell to the ground outside, gasping for air, her heart racing with fear and adrenaline. The forest loomed around her, its shadows deep and foreboding. The woman knew she couldn't stop, couldn't rest. She had to keep moving, had to escape the forest's grasp. She stumbled forward, her legs weak and trembling, the spirit's presence still lingering in the air. Behind her the cabin stood silent and dark, its secrets buried once more. The forest had claimed another victim, but she had escaped its clutches. For now. As she fled into the night, the whispers faded, and the forest fell silent once more. The woman knew she would never forget the horrors she had witnessed, the malevolent spirit that still lurked within the cabin's walls. But she was alive, and she would keep running, keep fighting until she was free from the forest's curse. As she stumbled out of the cabin, the night seemed to close in around her, the forest's shadows stretching out like dark tendrils. She could feel the cold, clammy hands of the shadows on her skin, pulling her deeper into the abyss. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. She screamed, her voice echoing through the trees, but the forest swallowed the sound, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. The whispers of the spirit faded, replaced by the oppressive quiet of the night. The shadows seemed to tighten their grip, drawing her further into the darkness. Panic surged through her as she fought against the unseen forces, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. But the forest was relentless, its grasp unyielding. She could feel herself being pulled deeper, the weight of the malevolent presence pressing down on her. In her final moments of consciousness, she realized that the forest had claimed her, just as it had claimed so many before. The night grew silent once more, the shadows closing in around her, and the forest's secrets remained hidden, buried in the darkness. As the first light of dawn began to pierce through the trees, the forest stood still, its ancient mysteries undisturbed. The woman had become one with the shadows, her presence now a part of the forest's eternal embrace.